To create a texture synthesis, we want to locate the texture painting palette drawer, which is under Window Palette Drawers, Texture Painting. We want to have the Texture Libraries tab open and the Texture Synthesis tab open as well. In the Texture Libraries, we have some presets that we can start with. Let's try Smooth Stucco. We want to make that texture visible by clicking on Show Texture up here in the Enhanced Properties bar. This is where our texture will appear. We can increase the opacity, and now we can see that texture much better. Now, in order to create a synthesis, you need a selection. But in order to make a selection of this texture, we need to go ahead and fill something with the texture, because right now we're just seeing the texture overlay of where the texture would go. So let's go to Edit, Fill, and instead of current color, we'll fill with texture. And now our canvas is filled with that texture. We can go ahead and hide that texture overlay, and you can see that that texture is now on the canvas. Now we can create a selection using the rectangular marquee. I'm going to select right around here. This is the area that's going to get analyzed and turned into a new texture. In the Texture Synthesis panel, we want to choose Document as the source. That's this document here. We'll go ahead and leave the tile settings alone for now, but this is going to control the output that we get. We can choose where we want to send the output to. We can send it to a new layer, or we can send it to the texture library if we want to reuse it again and again. And we can choose the width and the height of the texture. So I'm going to send it to a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and make the size 1000 by 1000 pixels. And I'll go ahead and make a selection. I want to select an area that has a little bit of variety. And we'll click on Play. And you can see it's creating that synthesis by analyzing that area and then trying to match up the edges to make it seamless to create a larger pattern. If we look up here in the Layers palette, it added that to a new layer. I'm going to delete that new layer. We can also get different results by selecting different areas. So if I select this area over here, set it to Document for the source, click on Play, it's going to give me a different result when I synthesize. Now, if this is taking a long time to complete, you can always click the Stop button to stop it midway. Let's try another synthesis and let's play with some of the settings here under Tile Settings. If you turn off Random Seed, then you'll get the same pattern every time. So 100 will give you a different result than 99 or 98 or 50 or 2. The side length will set the tile size as a percentage of the selection size. So if the side length is larger, you're going to get bigger, broader shapes. If the side length is smaller, you're going to get smaller, finer shapes. Let's try side length down to 2. And let's do a synthesis. And you can see it's doing very, very, very tiny little strokes here, and it's going to take a long time to complete. I'll go ahead and click the Stop button because that's going to take forever. Since that's on a new layer, I'll just hide that and we'll compare it a little bit later. Let's go back to the canvas. We'll use that same selection, that same seed. This time we'll increase the side length. Let's do 58. Set it back to Document for the source and we'll click Play. Now you can see it's using bigger, broader, chunky areas to complete the synthesis. You can increase the randomness of the tiles by clicking on Scramble. Let's do a synthesis with that using the same settings. It scrambles it up a bit, as you can see. So if we take a look at all the different results, you can see that it looks completely different depending on the settings that I choose. You can also synthesize directly from a texture. I'll select a texture for my source. I'm going to try this terrain texture here. That automatically loads the texture here, and then I can simply make a selection of that, choose my tile settings and my Send To settings, and then click Play. And now we've used our selection to create a unique texture using the texture synthesis. Now you can synthesize from any image here in your texture libraries, but not all images are going to work well. The images that are going to work the best are going to be something that has a consistent pattern with a lot of repeating elements that isn't too complex. So for example, you wouldn't want to try to synthesize the horse. If you've ever seen the movie The Fly, then you're going to have a good idea of what's going to happen here when we try to synthesize this horse. I'm going to select texture as my source. I'll make a selection here of the horse. Don't try this at home. And we'll go ahead and click Play to process it. Yeah, I told you not to try this at home. Look at what it's doing to the horse. It's just completely ripping it apart. And while this would work well for abstract art, it doesn't work very well for creating a seamless pattern. Although nevertheless, the effect is kind of cool. Now you're not limited to only using the texture synthesis presets. You can also load your own images. For example, I'll load this abstract piece that I created here. It has a lot of repeating patterns. So I can simply select an area. Let's say this area over here. Select Document as my source. Let's do Random Seed. Let's do side length back to 20. 20 is a good number to use for most purposes. We'll choose Scramble, and we'll go ahead and play the synthesis. And you can see that this is what it created here, a nice seamless repeating pattern. Now, rather than sending that to a new layer, I could also send it to the texture library to make it a texture that I can reuse again and again. Go ahead and make a selection, create the synthesis. I'll give it a name, I'll just call it test. And if we look here in texture synthesis, in the texture libraries, there's our test texture. And then I could create a new canvas. I could go to my texture 2.5D brushes, and I could use that texture synthesis as the basis for impasto for one of my texture 2.5D brushes, or for any other purpose. You could also paint elements on your canvas to create a texture synthesis. I'm going to go to the airbrushes and choose pepper spray. I'm going to set my feature to 8, and I'll just click right here in the center with my mouse, and maybe this is going to be the texture that I want to replicate. I can simply make a selection, and in texture synthesis, I'll choose document for the output. This canvas is 1600 pixels by 900 pixels, so that's what I'm going to choose for my width and height. That way I fill the entire canvas. And I'll click on play to synthesize that. And you will notice that if you increase the size of your output, it's going to take a lot longer to process, especially so if you have a slower computer. So you'll need to give it time to finish, or click the stop button if you're tired of waiting. But you can see what it's doing is it's analyzing the pattern within the selection and replicating it to the output size that I specified here. Now, of course, if I gave it enough time, it would eventually fill the whole canvas here, which is what I asked it to do. But I'm just going to go ahead and click stop because I think you get the idea at this point.